try again.
All right, everybody, welcome back to the Dirt Road. That's the Dirt Road behind us here on the beautiful farmland of the New York City area. That's Mike.
And that's Rick.
And that's Bella.
That's Bella. That's my favorite niece over here. That's
Bella
Mike's
the
daughter.
princess.
Little princess, you're going to help us. We're going to be talking about how we rank presidents as great or bad. Who's your favorite president, babe?
Trump.
Trump. That's a shock coming from this house. Well, my favorite's FDR and then Ronald Reagan. Who's your favorite, Mike?
Ronald Reagan, honestly. Still Ronald Reagan.
All right, so we got a little bit of agreement, a little bit of disagreement. Bella's going to give us her reasons for Trump being a great president a little bit later on. But we're going to let you go back upstairs and play now, okay, honey?
Bye.
Say bye to everybody.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye. See you in a
Bye,
little
Peanut.
bit.
See you in a while.
So, Mike, what
Yes.
precipitated this conversation is just recently, I just want to pull this up here to make sure I get this correct.
Sure.
Every now and again, they do these rankings. I thought C-SPAN did it, but it doesn't mention it in this article. They do a ranking of the presidents. I mean, it's goofy. It's like when Billboard ranks the top 5 rock and roll artists of all time. It's subjective,
100%.
I guess, but they do try to get, good historians here. But the most recent one that came out, let me just make sure I get this right. The rankings released Sunday, a day before President's Day, placed Biden as the 14th best president in American history, among the top third to serve in the Oval Office. This stands in stark contrast with his approval rating of 41%, and it does, obviously, the lowest at this point of any president since Gallup began tracking the metric under President Dwight D. Eisenhower in the 1950s. And then we could just skip down and guess, Mike. Just guess. I'll give you 2 guesses, 3 guesses if you want, if you need. You want to know where they rank Trump?
Oh, at the very bottom.
Unfucking believable.
At the very bottom.
I'm going to argue that Trump's not a great president. You'll probably argue with me, and I'll give you my reasons why. But to place him at the bottom is just insane.
But this, again, it's like everything else we've had in our modern culture, right? It's all pandering and like geared towards one side or the other, and it's nothing of any substance or reality at all.
Of course not. And academics lean left. We all know that, and that's fine. But usually they could be a little objective, especially as time passes. So. As time passed, Reagan moved up and up and up that ladder, and I believe in the last rankings they had him in the top 10, which is where he belongs, frankly, in my opinion. But to rank Trump at the bottom is absurd, and to rank Biden in the top third, this is nothing but just political nonsense. That's all. This can't even be paid attention to, and to me that's a shame, because as a historian, this is a joke.
It is. It's a complete pandering, disgusting mess, right? They're just trying to. It's just another tool in the toolbox where they're trying to make the case for Biden, which is ridiculous. They shouldn't be pandering to anyone. They shouldn't be doing that.
And it's almost
an honest, objective assessment of policy is really what
and
it
is hard to do that in the moment, Mike. I will give them
without
credit
a doubt,
for that.
because you have to see the timeline effect of how that policy
develops.
And
Historians are human beings, and human beings have feelings and biases and everything. And
sure, absolutely.
So that's why you tend to not get good books about presidents until they're long dead and gone, right?
Of course,
it took a long time. I can think of one really good book about the Reagan presidency. It was by Luke Hannon. It was called The Role of a Lifetime. That came within, a short time period after his presidency. But really after that, most books about Reagan were either love letters to him, basically, or they could have been entitled Why Reagan Sucks. But as time went on, in the last 10 years, I think, we've actually gotten a few really good books about Ronald Reagan. So it does take time to get the personal biases out. If I were to write a book, or you were to write a book about James K. Polk, we'd have no emotional investment.
Of course not, because he's so far removed from the events at the time that you could say, you could be very objective, and that's really what's required for something like that.
Right. So to put somebody that recent, like Biden, actually not just recent, he's contemporary right now.
He's
to,
right in the
to
moment.
put him in the top third, you're putting him in the same sentence as some of the greatest presidents we ever had. And then to take Trump, who again, I'll tell you why I don't consider him a great president yet. I think it could have been, still could be. But to put, come on, at the fucking bottom, are these people out of their minds?
Well, no, they're showing their implicit bias, right? That's what they're doing. They're showing their implicit bias against anything that doesn't agree with their particular brand of worldview. MSNBC told me this, so this has got to be true. And stop.
But Mike, these are people that are supposed to be smarter than that. These are well-educated people. There are some great historians out there that are maybe left-leaning, but are still great historians. But to come out with just absolute, utter garbage like that. I mean, we talked about this in one video, so I guess we shouldn't get into it again, but I asked you almost rhetorically, by what metric can Biden possibly be considered great? Man has had a 38 to 43% approval rating since the summer of his first term.
I would think that it's even lower than that realistically, because I don't think there's that many mentally ill people in the country, but I could
be
wrong.
But that's what we have, at least, you know, and to be a great president, you do, look, for anybody to be a great leader, you have to be able to have followers, right? I mean, you have to have people that follow you. That's the definition of a leader. You got to look over your shoulder and see a shitload of people behind you. Right. And when you're walking around with a 38, 40, 42% approval rating for basically your entire presidency, I'm sorry, you cannot be considered a great or successful president. And that's where I am with Trump, too. To me, to be considered a great president, you have to convince 51% of the country that you deserve a second term. So I don't think really one-term presidents, with maybe the exception of Polk, because he ran as a one-term president, said he was going to do X, Y, and Z, did X, Y, and Z, left, and then died a couple of years later, or a few months later, I don't remember. But anyway, so let's get to you before we talk about my versions. What to you would make, other than your own political beliefs, obviously, right, what to you makes a great president, and what to you makes a failing president?
Honestly, if I'm looking at it objectively, just policy, right? The effect the policy had. Did it empower people in the country? Did the country do better as a whole? Did people do better as a whole? What kind of crises did they face, and how did they manage those crises? Those kinds of things to me would be the marks of a great leader or a great president. A great leader or a great president should be advocating for all Americans, right? And for American success. Because you're leading the country, you should be leading the country to success. Biden is deconstructing the country.
Well, how would you measure that? Objectively.
Economics, quality of living, standard of living, unemployment rates, all those metrics that we normally would look at and say, okay, these are things that tell us the country's on the right track, it's doing well, whatever. And traditionally, those were all the markers we used. Since, I guess maybe Obama's second term, that started to get twisted. The media twists those numbers now, and now even under Biden's, presidency, even the government twists those numbers. Oh, we're taking this metric out of this because it makes it look bad, so we're putting this one in, which is complete fluff nonsense. It makes no difference in it, but it makes it look better.
But that's more politics you're talking about. I mean,
what I'm saying is they're taking the objective evidence. Right, I'm taking the objective. They're taking the objective evidence and they're changing it, though. They're gaslighting everybody. So they're changing the way we even look at things to try and, make him a great president. But look at how many failed policies he's had, right? So even if we go 50 years in the future right now, okay, and we say it's 2074 and we're looking back at Biden's presidency, he would never be considered a great president. He'd be considered a failed president, He had serious cognitive issues during the entire presidency. He's had no successful policies, no successful anything. His withdrawal from Afghanistan to his domestic policies have all been disastrous, if not, criminally negligent.
So I agree with you. And of course we can't know what people are going to say, in the year 2075. Right. But again, if you just look at the objective metrics,
evidence,
we see, and I don't want this to become an anti-Biden video because we do want to talk about a lot of presidents historically.
But it's just the more recent clear example.
The fact that they're putting him as number 14 is just so absurd when the world was at peace when he came in, or at least on a peaceful path.
Yeah, on that path.
And now it's blowing up. Prices have gone through the roof.
Yeah.
I don't care. This guy could say he's a unifier. If you're a unifier, you don't have a 40% approval rating. You have a 60% approval rating, like Reagan did and some other presidents did.
Right.
So he's not a unifier. I mentioned this in one of our previous podcasts. He says, "Oh, he signed this bill and that bill." All presidents fucking sign bills.
There's nothing miraculous about that. There's nothing great about that.
The question is, was it your baby? Did you guide it through Congress? Did you get that bill through?
Did you use your political capital to bring that bill to fruition to kind of get that policy
And
pushed
we had even mentioned, whatever someone's views are on Obamacare, you do have to give him credit, if we could use that word. That was his baby. He ran on it. He got it through Congress.
Listen,
he caused his party to commit political suicide, if you remember.
Oh, yeah, they got annihilated for it, yeah.
So I'm sure the party wasn't that happy about it, but is he going to go down as a great president? No, I don't think so, Obama, but at least he had an accomplishment, right? So even Jimmy Carter had the Camp David Accords. He had an accomplishment. There was something that 80 years from now people could look back on and say, you accomplished something. And he was not a successful president, but he had a success. I can't think of anything other than not being Trump that Biden can take credit for.
There's nothing. There's nothing. He could have, simply put, Biden could have just got in that seat and sat there and touched nothing and had a very successful presidency.
Maybe
and
so.
everything would have gone,
Yeah.
But instead he chose to go in there and undo Trump and his effect on the country. And what did he do? He created a ginormous disaster. I mean, you've got a humanitarian crisis at the southern border. Mm-hmm. Humanitarian crisis in our cities now because all those people flooding across that border.
Right.
You have exploding crime rates, exploding inflation.
And these are objective things. We're not even talking about whether or not you agree politically with policy.
No, this is not right left. This is the
just
reality of what we're living with right now.
The results of his actions.
His policies.
Right.
So I think the best measure of a president is their policy and the effect it had. Like Reagan, comes into office, effectively ends the Cold War, restores the economy from the disaster that it was under Carter, restores American prestige on the world stage, bring back American strength on the world stage.
And got reelected winning 49 states.
Right. Look at the way he spoke, right? Reagan spoke so eloquently. And even when he was speaking to somebody on the so-called left, his so-called political enemies or whatever, he would joke with them. He would laugh with them. He would be very cordial and inviting and warm with them.
Well,
and he was a unifier.
Remember who his political idol was? FDR.
Well, that's
right, and he learned that from the fireside chats and the way FDR was able
absolutely
to assuage people's fears and get the country moving again, and that is an important part of being a leader, right?
FDR led. I understand your love of FDR. I get it. I absolutely get it. The guy led through, the Great Depression and World War II.
World War II. Yeah.
So two of the biggest crises we saw as a country, other than maybe the Civil War. And this guy carried the country through some extreme times, and he did so while at the same time kind of soothing people's fears and kind of bringing people together and getting them all mission-oriented on the tasks that need to be done to restore the nation.
Yeah.
So definitely top three, one of the greats,
Absolutely.
For me, definitely one of the top three, just not my top one. Right, so as I was saying, FDR, right, he's leading through these crises, he's doing these fireside chats, and while managing this vast government and trying to get this policy in place, he still took the time to assuage people's fears, get them all on point and on track and moving towards a common goal together to restore the nation. That's a hell of a thing to do. It's a big, big lift.
And it's a hell of a thing to do to convince people to stay behind you and get elected 4 times.
Exactly.
So I do think
100%.
being reelected is important. Jefferson even mentioned that in his second inaugural, that he considered re-election as basically America giving its imprimatur to your first term and saying, we approve of what
agree.
you did. But the way that they're ranking them now is based on nothing but pure emotion. Back when George W. Bush was president, what the hell was his name? Shlomo Lentz, political scientist / historian, wrote a piece in Rolling Stone magazine. And the piece was George W. Bush, the worst president in history. And this is a really, really smart guy. He really is. He wrote a really good book about the Reagan years too, called the Era of Reagan. I can't remember the name of it anyway, but this is a very left-wing guy, and give him Reagan credit for all the things he did. There are other left-wing historians that do too. Rick Perlstein. Anyway, my point is that he wrote this article, George W. Bush, the worst president in American history, during the Bush years. He had, good reasoning. He was talking about the Iraq War, and it was becoming a disaster at that time and so forth. All right, fine. I think it's a little silly to judge somebody in the moment like that, but whatever, it was fine. Guess what article that same man wrote in Rolling Stone about 15 years later?
Trump is the worst president.
Exactly.
Okay, he's showing his own partisan bias.
Right. Yeah. So, you can't have every president that you don't like be the worst president in American history.
But, here's the thing about it, right? The cultural memory is short-term and very much short-term, right? And that's just it. So cultural memory, where people are focused on things, it's very contemporary. It's very much in the moment now. So, in every particular moment, oh, this is the worst ever. No, but this is the worst ever. Wait, this is the worst ever. And that's what you're seeing across, the landscape of media, right? Both on right and left, though.
Yeah. And that's why I don't say Biden's the worst president in American history. I do say at this point, because we are 4 years in now almost, and we have seen the results of it, I do firmly believe he's the worst president in my lifetime. But I got to tell you something, I'm nonpartisan. I'm here somebody, I praise FDR and Reagan in the same sentence.
Sure.
And You know who I thought was the worst president in my lifetime before Joe Biden?
Jimmy Carter?
No, George W. Bush. So it's not partisan. And I voted for George W. Bush.
So did
I don't feel like just because I voted for somebody that I have some sort of investment in them and I must say that they're a great president.
No,
So
I
I
agree with
thought he was the worst president of my lifetime until this guy came along. And I didn't say this 2 years ago. I didn't say this 3 years ago. I didn't say it a year ago. I say it now. We're at the end of his presidency, and I think we have enough evidence to at least talk about the things that are in my
I mean,
memory.
look, you have his presidency, right? There's really not much time left in the presidency.
Right.
He's not running again. That's come out, obviously.
Right.
So you have
Which I think brings him down even more, by the way. The fact that he got pushed out
of there by his own party.
because they knew he couldn't win.
Oh,
He didn't
no
get
doubt.
pushed out of there because he's old and senile. They knew he was
No.
old and senile before the debate.
Before the debate, yeah.
It was after the debate when they realized, hey,
His
this
numbers
guy
tanked
can't
completely,
win,
yeah.
that they pushed him out.
Well, you know
So-
what happened after the debate was everybody got a front row seat to just how bad this guy really is, cognitively how bad he really is, and they were like, wait a minute, we can't do this.
Well, we had that front row seat. I think it was because 50 million people were watching, and even the news media can't tell 50 million people they didn't see what they just saw.
Well, they're trying right now with the whole Kamala was never the, the border czar thing, but, gaslighting aside, you're absolutely right. Yeah. Look, he's a disaster on two legs. I think we have enough evidence to say that he'll definitely rank amongst the worst presidents to ever sit in that seat.
I do too. And back to Trump, I do think if he gets reelected and has another 4 years to complete what he wanted to do, maybe then I would change my mind. I don't think he was a bad president by any stretch. My problems with Trump were he didn't unite the country. He never even sniffed 50% in the polls. I mean, you have to get people. Part of being a leader is getting people to follow, right? And he was never able to get a majority of the country to think the way you do and frankly the way I do. And when you can't do that, when you have access to all this media, and I understand the media was against him. The media was against Reagan.
The media bias is part of the problem.
But
that's
Mike,
part of the problem, not the whole problem.
Other
right?
presidents were able to easily overcome that. The media was very hostile to Reagan. They were calling him a racist. They were calling him a warmonger.
Sure,
they call
terrible
things. And Reagan would smile and go like this by the helicopter. Remember, I can't really hear you. Sorry. And continue to walk towards the helicopter. So there are ways to overcome that. And if you are going to be considered a great president, you do have to overcome that.
Well, I think there's a diplomatic side to it that definitely factors into it. I think Trump's presidency and Trump himself as a president will be considered amongst the great ones at some point when people kind of have had enough time to kind of get past their emotional reactions to the whole thing.
Unlike Biden, though, at least he has a tangible accomplishment, right? He had the Abraham Accords.
You had the Abraham Accords along with, look, if you look at his economy and everything else under his, he had a very good showing for the most part. COVID kind of skewed that a bit, obviously. Things got on sideways.
Yeah, and I wasn't fond of the way he dealt with that.
Me neither. I disagree with a lot of the policy that came out of that.
Putting
his
Fauci out
office.
in front and center.
Well, listen, Operation Warp Speed, Fauci out in center, the 2 weeks to slow the spread.
Yeah,
There's a number of things about that I disagree with wholeheartedly.
And then, he had the chance there to be an FDR, right? Somebody that had a national crisis and could have dealt with it in a certain way and made Americans feel better. And he's coming out with his press conferences about how much the governors love him, and he's, I'm getting great ratings on this, and it's like, shut up, man. At least
just shut up and talk about what you're doing to fix the problem.
Yeah, and do a Clinton, I feel your pain sort of a thing, learn how to bullshit. But so I wasn't too happy with him
Clinton's
there.
good at that. Yeah, he was very good at
but
that.
he did have an accomplishment with the Abraham Accords. He did.
That was huge.
He did oversee definitely a good economy. So I think he could have been, and I think he could have been transformational had he been reelected. And he still has a chance if he gets elected. Now, that's another thing I think that separates great presidents from others. They build new coalitions.
Exactly.
Right? New
yes,
coalitions
100%.
of voters.
Well, Lincoln kind of set the precedent, right? Lincoln with the Republican Party at his time, he created this whole new party, honestly, and coalition, right? That's absolutely. And that's I think anybody, whatever side you're on, would probably agree that he's definitely ranks amongst one of our greatest presidents.
Who, Lincoln?
Yeah.
Oh, that's not even a debate. Yeah.
So I think that's another good example. Of
whenever you read these rankings, there's always the same top three, right? George Washington, FDR, and Abraham Lincoln. Mm-hmm. George Washington gets thrown in there because he basically created the presidency.
Right. He was the founding president, so he was able to kind of set the tone of what it's really going to be and help structure things.
And he had nobody to look back on, right? So
he was going from scratch.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So he kind of built that
role
entity
out.
In and of himself, and most of the way he did it was awesome. It was great.
You could see the same for FDR, though, right? He kind of built the modern presidency.
Oh, absolutely.
Because it kind of, Before him, it was vastly different. After him, it was vastly different. So you could say he was definitely that transformative.
And the same thing with Ronald Reagan, right? I mean, the country was one way before
Reagan
he became president.
absolutely
a different way
reinvented
afterwards.
the office as well as the country.
Sure, and he almost brought back that FDR. I'm going to be the great communicator and
well, that's what you
get
want
the country
in a
together,
leader, right?
Right.
That
and
person that
remember,
makes you feel,
Reagan was able to overcome his own party's objections, the neoconservatives in the Republican Party, to make peace with the Soviet Union.
Sure, he ended the Cold
treaties.
War against their wishes because they loved the Cold War, right? Because they made
of
money
course.
on it.
And they were very, very much against him negotiating with Gorbachev and making these treaties and so forth. But the difference was that Reagan was so fucking popular.
They had nowhere to go.
No, they couldn't try to destroy him. So that's part of what makes a great
I think
president
that,
too.
if I'm being honest, just projecting a little bit, I think that's what we'll see in a second Trump presidency. Say we fast forward, Trump wins the presidency in November. I think in a second Trump presidency, I think the popularity factor and his ability to kind of, generate that excitement is what will carry his message and his policies through for him in the second term.
Well, we'll see, because part of it also is getting your stuff through a hostile Congress sometimes, right? Reagan never, ever came close to having a Republican House of Representatives.
No.
Not even close. He had the Senate for about 3/4 of his presidency, but it kind of went up and down a little bit.
Sure.
Another thing great presidents do is bring their party in, right? So Reagan, for the first time in a long time, had the Senate become Republican.
Mm-hmm.
So, and then just a few years after he was out, remember you had the Gingrich Revolution. All of a sudden, the first time in 40 years, I think, right? The 1990s. So about 40 years for the first time, the House of Representatives turns Republican.
Yep.
So Reagan really did transform the country
Sure.
and transform politics. But you have to be able to get your stuff through a hostile Congress, like he did.
Sure.
Because you
gotta
can't
navigate that swamp.
Yeah, because you can't always have the excuses, the media's against me and Congress is against me.
I agree.
You have to be able to get things through, and that's what great presidents do. But we'll see with Trump. I think he definitely has the ability. I think he can be a transformative president.
The potential is definitely there. Listen, the potential is definitely there. I think he could definitely do some great things. And we'll see. Exactly. We'll see what he can do.
But, I mean, my God, these fucking Malakas rating Trump at the bottom. Come on. You could be the biggest Trump hater of all time. And if you know anything about history, you're going to tell me he's worse than James Buchanan? You're going to tell me he's worse than I don't know, Andrew Johnson?
There's a level of intellectual integrity, right, that's been lost in the modern era.
And
it really
it's sad.
is.
It's
it really
really
is.
sad.
Because everybody's taken this partisanship to the umpteenth power in every facet of life. And that is a completely wrong thing to do, right?
Yeah.
It's completely counterproductive and just ridiculous.
And it's not academic.
This is the real.
It's not. These are academics. These are supposed to be people who know how to make themselves a little disinterested when they're trying to analyze the past.
Well, yeah, you're supposed to be able to be objective, right? As a detective, I had to be objective and just follow the evidence, not what I think, but what the evidence tells
You
me.
couldn't throw somebody in jail because you hated them.
Yeah, no, of course not.
Right, you had to have evidence.
Only the Biden regime could do that.
And that's the way academics are supposed to be. And again, they have the right to their opinion, and they don't have to rate Trump at the top, and they don't have to rate Biden at the bottom.
I don't know why we're rating modern presidents anyway.
Well, that's what I said earlier on, right?
Yeah.
It's really, really difficult in the moment to do that because the emotions
At least
are just
10 years after they're out of office. At least 10 years.
At least, yeah. And that's when you started to see good books about Reagan come out. And I don't think we're going to live long enough to see a good book about Donald Trump.
Well, I mean, it depends on who you read, right?
No, I mean just a good, fair, objective book that
right, not the fanboy stuff you keep seeing there.
Right. No, I don't want to read a book by a MAGA historian.
I gotta say this. I don't get the fanboy stuff in politics. Like, I don't get it. Like, I don't get the fanboy stuff in politics. Like, listen, I love Trump's policies. I think the guy's great. He's bombastic. He's very, very crass at times. But I think he's got a hell of a show, a hell of a personality. I think he's a very successful man, so I admire him and I like him in a lot of ways.
Me too.
But I don't want to date the guy, and I don't get this constant obsession, with this fanboy thing.
I think it's a savior complex, and I think this really does go back to FDR, because I don't really think it was like that before him. But I think from FDR on, we've had this kind of feeling in America that a president can save us. A president can make things right. And
I never thought about that, but that's absolutely accurate. That makes a lot of sense. Look at that.
I mean, even the way we talk, and I've said it myself. I mean, I've literally used the word fan when talking about Ronald Reagan. I said I'm a big fan of Ronald Reagan,
I've said that
he's
too.
A fucking rock star. He's not. So I was a supporter of him.
Smart guy. And he was an excellent communicator, right? You have a book called Ronald Reagan in His Own Words, and it's all like excerpts of letters and speeches
Yeah,
he
I
gave.
have that book too.
Great book, right? And when you read what he wrote and his thoughts and things like that, it kind of comes through who he really was. It comes through how he spoke and how, honestly, how he developed that ability to be so great at communicating. It really kind of shines through and comes through. And I think that, you're absolutely right. That's a great hallmark of a leader. Look at FDR. I said the fireside chats. That is a very strong, good hallmark of a leader, because a leader, you're right, gets people to follow. Yeah, they lead.
Leads by definition, right?
Yeah. So I mean.
And by the way, we were talking about Reagan. I forgot to tell you, in this, finally he was starting to get his due.
Yeah.
And he was ranking in the top 10. And again, I don't take these rankings any more seriously than, the Billboard rankings of the top 10 rap artists of all time. But they're still interesting to read sometimes. But they finally had him consistently in the top 10. And now all of a sudden, miraculously, he dropped down to 15.
Well, of course, because they're going to make room for Biden.
And 4 other presidents somehow.
Yeah, please.
Which is absurd. Who do you guys think is the greatest president in history? And you're right, it's kind of different modern presidents than.
Yeah, it's hard to. It's
a different job.
It's a different animal completely. There's a difference in, because you have different periods of time, like different metrics might be used to kind of measure their success.
Sure. I mean, so I think, in my opinion, the 2 greatest presidents of the last century, last 100 years, are FDR and Reagan. And by the way, I think Reagan would agree with that.
I would agree with that.
Because Reagan was a big admirer of FDR.
Sure.
Probably the greatest president in history, if we're going to just put everything out there, it had to be Lincoln, I guess, right? I mean,
you kind of got to throw it to Lincoln. I mean, listen, he went through the most traumatic time his probably country saw, other than its founding.
Of course.
He went through a hell of a, and paid for it with his life. But
Donald Trump and Joe Biden, neither one of them are the greatest. Neither one of them are the worst. I do believe Biden's the worst in my lifetime, though.
Biden is by far the worst in my lifetime. I think Trump will end up ranking pretty high in the end. I think his next term will determine that, though. But I do think he'll rank very highly. And
now, what if he loses this election?
I think that's it for him then, right? If he loses this election, that's it. There's no more.
Yeah,
there's no more race left in that, and that's you're just measuring him based upon his first. Which the Abraham Accords will be his big win. Which it's no small thing. The Abraham Accords.
No, it's not a small thing at all. Not at all.
50 years of failure in that regard.
Reagan had Carter had an accomplishment similar to that with the Camp David Accords, and
sure.
Nobody in their right mind
is
ranks
calling him
Carter
a
as a great president.
A nice guy, but not a great president.
Although, compared to Biden, he was Abraham Lincoln.
Was it compared to Biden? Yeah, 100%.
But we'll see. What do you guys think? Who do you think? What do you think makes a great president?
Let us know who you think the greatest president was, modern or historical.
And what's your criteria?
Yeah, what are you using to measure?
Yeah, because there has to be some kind of objective metrics, right?
Absolutely.
For it to be a fair
you
conversation.
Got to have something to substantiate.
So we all have our favorites, like you said, as fanboys. To me, that's Ronald Reagan.
Yeah,
I think
Reagan was amazing.
That was my guy. I'm not going to say he was Abraham Lincoln. I'm not going to say he was George Washington. I'm not going to say he was FDR.
But he was transformative.
It was transformative. He's a top 10 president, I think, in any objective sense. And but there are 2 ways to look at it, right? There's the objective ways. There's the subjective ways. Neither right's, neither wrong. But what do you guys think?
We'd love to hear.
We would. So put down in the comments who you think's the greatest president and why. Who you think's the worst president ever and why, or maybe in your lifetime. And Mike will get back to you.
I'll definitely get back to you. We look forward to hearing from you, and we'll definitely follow back up on this show with another show with your answers, your replies, your thoughts, and what we think about that as well.
On the fastest growing podcast on YouTube, we have increased our subscribers 7-fold.
That's right.
In the last few days,
we
went
from
0 to 7.
So 7 of you out there. There'll be more. We have no doubt. We have confidence in this and that it'll grow organically, naturally, and we can all grow together and hopefully
absolutely
bring about some kind of good changes.
Well, Mike, you got your radio show in about 5 minutes, so let's sign off. Have a great day, everybody.
Remember, 7.5 Radio. You can listen live 10 o'clock every Saturday night. I'll be on in about 5 minutes. I look forward to seeing you all there, and thanks again for tuning in. Like, subscribe, share.
Have a good night. We'll have you over to the farm one night.
Good night, guys.